Before the senator could say anything in reply, Alyssa began to climb up the walls, looking at the senator with eyes that glowed a strange reddish color. As the senator watched in horror, the left half of Alyssa's face morphed, growing a beard and a half-moon-shaped depression forming on her forehead. "Hello, Gideon," said Alyssa, in a voice that wasn't hers. The senator's eyes grew wide as Alyssa's jaw dropped lower than physically possible, and a swarm of locusts came buzzing out, spreading around the room and surrounding the senator. And that is an excerpt from the book I'll be reviewing today. It is called The Quiet Game: 5 Tales to Chill Your Bones by Rami Ungar. So this is my second experience with the works of Rami Ungar. My first experience was his novel Rose, which is a story about a woman who turns into a plant creature, and you can find a review of that novel in a previous video that I made. Published back in 2013, The Quiet Game definitely shows its stretch marks. You can tell Rami's still learning his craft and discovering his voice. Of course, it's arguable we are always learning our craft, even for the seasoned veteran. But don't disregard this collection outright. It still has its charm. One thing I love about Rami Ungar is the robust exuberance of his imagination. You can tell he's having a damn good time when he writes, and as a reader, I sense that as well. Even with some of the weaknesses in this collection, the charm of his excitement for the strange roads of his imagination pull you on through anyway. Rami's not just writing because he thinks he can make a lot of money or attain a lot of fame. He loves it. He lives and breathes it. It's who he is. Rami Ungar is a serious writer. I respect that. Addict is the first story in this collection. It's a story about a man struggling with a sex addiction, who one day, after encountering a woman struggling with heroin addiction, becomes inspired to overcome his addiction. Using a video that guides him into a meditative state, he encounters symbolic and tormenting visions of his addiction, women he saw in porn videos, prostitutes, girls from high school that teased him. During this delirious process, the entity guiding him into the hypnotic state discloses the void in his life that he feeds with continuous consumption of filth. This is the definition of lust, one who greedily consumes but is never filled or gratified. The story surprised me. Rami handled it quite maturely, despite some moments that felt somewhat overly contrived. He illustrated well how temptation torments us. The second story, I Want to Be the Next James Bond, was the weakest of the group for me, though it still has its charm. It's a tale about a group of teenage kids encountering a haunted, abandoned hospital. The main character, Ronnie, uses his James Bond fandom as inspiration to brave the ghosts they encounter. I related to old Ronnie in this tale. When I was 13, I loved James Bond flicks, thanks to the N64 game GoldenEye, a gateway to James Bond for many my age. I spent many summer afternoons pretending I was the charming and sophisticated secret agent, defusing bombs, fighting villains atop moving airplanes, jumping out of high-rise buildings as they exploded without a scratch. And don't forget seducing the ladies with that magic line, "The name's Bond, James Bond." All this is part of my issue with the story, however. I was distracted by the Bond element. The haunting elements and possessed doll lost their punch. Maybe it could have worked better in a longer form of a novella or short novel, allowing more investment in Ronnie. Perhaps the James Bond fandom could have become a running theme throughout the story, his imaginative scenario strengthening him against worse encounters with ghosts. Some of my issue was the humor, too. It ruined the horror effect for me, making it feel more like a Scooby-Doo cartoon instead of a horror story. Though, maybe that's my fault as a reader, expecting the story to be something it's not. Perhaps Rami meant for it to be more like an adventure fantasy, not a horror story. The galumphing title suggests this. In the Lady Ogre's Den comes next, and now we're talking. Rami hits a strong stride with this one. showing us the bizarre and disturbing experience of a young autistic boy named Jason. He suffers abuse at the hands of a nurse in the hospital and receives visits from a creature called the Death Wolf that preys on those nearing death. The story gives us an interesting view into the experience of someone suffering autism. Rami himself suffers with the disorder, though at a high-functioning level. He states in a postscript to the story that he dredged up, quote, long-buried memories to write from the point of view of Jason Cambridge, along with calling upon my own personal experiences with autistic children, end quote. The Quiet Game comes next, which was the first story Rami wrote for this collection, and it's definitely a strong point. The girls at St. Dunstan wake up one morning to the eerie shock of not being able to hear. Everyone in the entire school is deaf, requiring them to resort to whiteboards and projector screens along with limited lip reading in order to communicate. Soon they learn that a mysterious force has overtaken the school, and it wants them to play a little game in order to escape this awful scenario. Can they solve the game and be released? Can they play within the rules to avoid elimination? This was a great story. It felt like something that would have fit perfectly as a Doctor Who episode. There's also a hectic moment near the climax that brought to mind Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. This story is definitely a pleasure. The collection finishes with a slam-bang win. Samson Weiss's curse feels like a pure horror tale. Samson Weiss is a senator working hard on the campaign trail, meeting hectic appointments for speeches and interviews. Then one of the worst nightmares for a man in his position turns up. A stalker begins to hassle him. He soon discovers matters are much worse than your traditional stalker. This woman is a carrier, the carrier of a demanding message from beyond the grave. This story is about a Dybbuk, a wandering malevolent spirit that possesses the living until it can be exorcised. There's a great moment in the story when a horde of hellish locusts invade the senator's bedroom that had me grinning ear to ear, but in a good way. Rami also does a good job sprinkling in those background details of Samson's life as a senator, adding in useful verisimilitude, which makes the extraordinary moments more impactful. Overall, I rate The Quiet Game by Rami Ungar with a 3.5 out of 5. The stories are great. There's nothing wrong with Rami's imagination, but one big downside of this collection are the punctuation errors, especially when it comes to dialogue. There are so many moments when a sentence of dialogue should have ended with a comma followed by the dialogue tag. For example, quote, "Well done, period," he said, clapping his hands theatrically, end quote. These kinds of little mistakes constantly pulled me out of these wonderfully woven tales. That's a key reason I marked it down. However, as I said before, don't disregard the collection. This is one of his earliest works, written 8 years ago when he was discovering his craft. I still think you're in for a great pleasure. And that concludes my review of Rami Ungar's The Quiet Game, 5 Tales to Chill Your Bones. And this is DeathGroundReviews, the monster that devours horror, suspense, and all those things of the fantastic. I'll see you soon.